in several big storylines and rivalries during his time in WWE. He most famously main evented WrestleMania 11, where he fought NFL football player Lawrence Taylor. Bigelow's career in WWE ended in 1995, but he continued to wrestle in ECW, WCW, and on the independent wrestling scene. Sadly, in 2007, Bam Bam Bigelow was found dead in his home due to toxic levels of cocaine and other drugs in his body. While Bigelow wasn't the all-time greatest WWE wrestler, you would think that WWE would induct him into their Hall of Fame, especially given some of the people who they have inducted. So why haven't they? Well, reportedly, Bigelow was arrested for attempted kidnapping, robbery, and sexual assault, among other crimes, before his wrestling career. After his WWE career, Bigelow was charged with endangering a child through reckless driving, although the charges were later dropped. He was also sued for not paying child support by his ex-wife at one point. These might be the reasons why WWE hasn't inducted Bam Bam into the Hall of Fame. I put Bigelow at number 10 though, because allegedly WWE was considering inducting him in 2018. However, they had a change of plans, and so far, nothing has happened. While Bigelow likely did some awful things outside of the ring, it's worth mentioning that he saved 3 children from a house fire and suffered second-degree burns in doing so. While I can't say it's likely that Bam Bam Bigelow will get inducted, he is a lot more likely than who we're going to see towards the bottom of the list. With that, number 9, Miss Elizabeth. Wrestling fans of the 80s will remember Miss Elizabeth. The First Lady of Wrestling worked with her real-life husband, Macho Man Randy Savage, as a manager. Although she didn't wrestle, Elizabeth would be involved in a number of storylines, most famously the rivalry between Macho Man and Hulk Hogan. Even after leaving WWE, Miss Elizabeth would continue to be involved in the wrestling business while working for WCW. However, at the age of 42, the wrestling valet would sadly pass away. She was found unconscious in her home and rushed to a hospital, where she died. The cause of death was an accidental drug overdose from a combination of alcohol and painkillers. Despite WWE themselves calling Miss Elizabeth the First Lady of Wrestling, she hasn't been inducted into the Hall of Fame. There are no confirmed reasons, but there are a few theories. One is her death and the controversy around it. At the time of her death, Elizabeth was in a relationship with wrestler Lex Luger. It sadly wasn't a healthy partnership, as Luger was arrested for hitting Elizabeth at one point. Another possible reason for Miss Elizabeth's absence is her family. Allegedly, Elizabeth's family blamed wrestling for her death, and thus didn't want to see WWE, or the wrestling business in general, benefiting from her. In fact, it's reported that Miss Elizabeth's family banned or discouraged anyone from the wrestling business from attending her funeral. However, time does heal wounds. Years after her death, Elizabeth's family agreed to a Legends deal, which allowed WWE to start using her name and likeness on merchandise and other things. While it's not a requirement, WWE does lean towards inducting wrestlers who are under a Legends contract. All that's to say is that there is hope that Miss Elizabeth will one day be inducted into the Hall of Fame. Additionally, Miss Elizabeth never hated or spoke negatively about WWE, but this next wrestler did. Number 8, King Kong Bundy. Even if you've never heard of King Kong Bundy, you know with a name like that, he's a big boy. Bundy was most well known for his time in the 1980s, and while he didn't rise to the levels of Andre the Giant, Bundy was still a name. His most famous match happened at WrestleMania 2, when he fought Hulk Hogan in a steel cage match for the WWE Championship. Bundy sadly died in 2019, but the big man has never been inducted into the Hall of Fame. Part of the reason may have been Bundy participating in a concussion lawsuit against WWE in 2016. However, there's a more likely story. In 2005, Randy Orton was doing his Legend Killer character, where he had beat up WWE legends. WWE wanted to bring back King Kong Bundy to be part of the storyline, so Tommy Dreamer, who was working for the company's talent relations, reached out. Bundy replied with a list of demands, saying, quote, "I need you to relay this message to WWE, especially to Vince McMahon. Number 1, you need to tell him that he needs to pay me the money that he owes me. Number 2, unless there is a creative idea for me winning the title, I have no interest in it, because he promised me the title when I put over Hulk Hogan, and he never delivered, so please go tell him to go F himself." This revealed a strained relationship Bundy had with WWE, especially Vince McMahon, which is likely the main reason that King Kong Bundy has never been inducted. However, with McMahon now gone from the company, maybe the door is open for a Hall of Fame induction. It's a bit more likely than seeing number 7, Jim Cornette. It seems like these days, Jim Cornette is more well known for his podcast than his time in wrestling. For those who don't know, Cornette worked both as an on-screen manager as well as a booker and promoter behind the scenes. He's considered one of the best minds in the wrestling business, but he's also famous for his temper. Cornette would yell at people backstage and even get physical. Jim Cornette infamously smacked Santino Marella backstage, which resulted in Cornette getting fired from WWE. Cornette's done well for himself as a podcaster, but he regularly gets accused of making racist, sexist, and homophobic comments. Cornette doesn't help himself either when he villains vilifies modern wrestling and takes shots at WWE's current roster. These reasons are likely why WWE has not and will not induct Cornette into their Hall of Fame. Now, there are two things in Jim Cornette's favor. One is that he actually did appear at the Hall of Fame in 2017, where he inducted the Rock and Roll Express. Additionally, a much more likely path for Cornette is if WWE inducts the Midnight Express, the most famous and successful tag team Cornette managed. Still, due to him regularly getting himself into hot water, it'd be tough to see WWE want to touch Cornette. Now, this next wrestler, WWE would likely induct in a heartbeat if they were allowed to, and that person is number 6, Owen Hart. Owen Hart is arguably the most deserving person for a Hall of Fame induction. Hart was phenomenal in the ring and was one of the best, if not the best, on any show he was a part of. Adding to this, Owen Hart had a range as a character. He could be funny, like when he was in the Nation of Domination, or he could be serious, like during his rivalry with Bret Hart. Additionally, while a lot of great wrestlers are human trash behind the scenes, Owen Hart was the complete opposite. He was a loving family man with a wife and 2 young children. In fact, he wanted to retire early so he could spend more time with them. Sadly, Owen's tragic death during the 1999 Over the Edge pay-per-view prevented him from doing that. During the live broadcast, Owen Hart was performing a special entrance where he'd be lowered from the ceiling down into the ring. However, a malfunction with the equipment caused Owen to fall 78 feet and ultimately die. WWE did turn the following night's episode of Raw into a tribute to Hart, and if it were up to them, Owen would likely be in the Hall of Fame. However, Owen Hart's family hasn't agreed to it for this reason.
I would never allow for Owen to be recognized by a company that actually is responsible for his death.
I would never let WWE put his name on a piece of silver and say that they got that.
Even without a Hall of Fame induction, Owen Hart's legacy is still celebrated. A non-profit was set up in his name, and AEW hosts an annual tournament named after him. Unfortunately, this next individual is more vilified than celebrated, and his name is, number 5, Jack Tunney. Newer fans probably don't know who this is, but fans from the Hulkamania era will remember this man well. Jack Tunney was the on-screen president of WWE, basically like a general manager. Whenever you saw Jack Tunney on screen, you knew the law was going to be laid down, whether it was stripping wrestlers of titles, banning managers from ringside, or whatever. However, despite being an iconic part of old school WWE, Tunney has been practically erased from history. The company never brings him up, and he's not even listed on WWE's alumni page. I guess they had to make room for Johnny Saint. So why is this? In addition to his on-screen role, Jack Tunney also ran and promoted many of WWE's shows in Canada during the 80s and 90s. One of the first allegations against Tunney is that he was taking more money from the shows than Vince McMahon felt he deserved. However, a more serious one is that Tunney actually used company money to pay off his gambling debt. Although, people close to Tunney say that this is an excuse made up by the WWE. But this wasn't the worst of it. In the early 90s, a wrestler named Terry Garvin started working behind the scenes for WWE. He was openly gay and would give wrestlers and other employees jobs and promotions in exchange for sexual favors. If not, those individuals might be punished or even fired. Now, what does that have to do with Jack Tunney? Well, allegedly, Tunney witnessed Garvin harassing a referee, but ultimately did nothing about it. Apparently, Tunney was ready to back the referee in court, but WWE higher-ups ended up convincing him not to. There are some other reasons too, but those are the most likely reasons Jack Tunney's relationship with WWE went down the drain. In fact, when Jack Tunney died in 2004, WWE did not send a single representative to be present at his funeral, and didn't mention it on TV or even their website. That really says a lot, and it shows why President Tunney will never be inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame. This next wrestler, though, will never be inducted for just being downright evil, and that is number 4, Dynamite Kid. For those newer fans, Dynamite Kid is not a young fan of AEW's flagship show. Rather, Dynamite Kid is considered one of the most talented and influential wrestlers of the past 50 years. Wrestlers like Bret Hart, Daniel Bryan, and Chris Benoit were all inspired by him and helped shape their careers. So then, why hasn't Dynamite Kid been inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame? Well, it all has to do with what Kid did outside of the ring. Dynamite Kid was very violent towards his wife. He reportedly locked her in cupboards, kicked her out of their home, and infamously threatened to kill her with a shotgun in front of their children. Additionally, Dynamite Kid allegedly abused and drugged his dog, as well as Jake Roberts' snake. With how insane and horrible of a human being Dynamite Kid was, it's safe to say WWE will never induct him into their Hall of Fame. Number 3, Alberto Del Rio. Alberto Del Rio seemed like the next major Hispanic WWE star. He debuted in 2010, and within a year, he won the Royal Rumble and the WWE Championship. In total, he became a 4-time world champion during his career with WWE, in addition to a number of other accomplishments. Reports surfaced that Vince McMahon was personally a big supporter of Del Rio, which is one of the main reasons he was pushed so hard. However, a long series of bad decisions and controversies would ruin his career. It started about 4 years into Del Rio's WWE run, when Alberto Del Rio was fired in August 2014. The firing came after Del Rio got into an altercation with a WWE employee who allegedly made a racist joke. However, a year later, Alberto Del Rio returned to WWE, defeating John Cena and winning the United States Championship. Unfortunately for Alberto, his second run with the company was shorter than his first. In August 2016, Alberto was suspended for violating WWE's wellness policy. The suspension was supposed to only last 30 days, but ended up being permanent as WWE and Del Rio came to terms and he was released from his contract. Backstage, Del Rio was apparently upset with WWE, claiming he was given empty promises like a main event push that didn't happen. However, the real issues with Alberto Del Rio would come after he left the company. While in WWE, Del Rio began a relationship with fellow wrestler Paige. The two even got engaged when Paige proposed to Del Rio after a wrestling show. However, this was not a healthy relationship. The two had a very public breakup, with Paige accusing Del Rio of abusing her, even leading to a police investigation. However, Alberto also accused Paige of being abusive, and while Paige would admit her own faults, she still suffered emotional and physical abuse during their relationship. But this wasn't the end of Del Rio's story. In 2020, the former WWE champion was arrested after allegedly tying up a woman and abusing her. A grand jury would indict Del Rio, but ultimately, the charges were all dropped after the victim recanted her story. This doesn't necessarily mean that the original allegations were all false, and Alberto Del Rio has had a tough time rebuilding his career. Because of all this, it's impossible for WWE to bring back Alberto Del Rio, much less celebrate his career with a Hall of Fame induction. Now, the next person on this list is the reason there's a WWE Hall of Fame, but ironically, he'll never get to be a part of it, and that person is Number 2, Vince McMahon. Wrestling would look very different today without Vince McMahon, and a lot of stars like John Cena, The Undertaker, Stone Cold Steve Austin, and Roman Reigns may have never been created. This makes McMahon more than deserving of a spot in the WWE Hall of Fame. Now, whether or not Vince would ever accept a Hall of Fame induction into the company he created is debatable, but while the door used to be wide open, it's been closed